Okay, let's have a look at taking the weathering off of a factory finished weathered model. This weathering is, as I've said, a very strange colour, and it actually detracts from the model quite a lot. It's going to be difficult to get the colour off of the underframe, to be honest, so what I'm going to do is when we get into the acrylic sessions, I'll mix the colour up to repaint the underframe instead of trying to remove the colour. On the surface of the body though, good old meths on a cotton bud will eventually remove the factory weathering without attacking the underlying finish, and that includes these printed details which have been put on at the same time as the lettering. All you need to do is get some meths on a cotton bud and just start working against the model. It's going to take a while for the meths, and this is a particularly harsh model for a cotton bud to work on because of all of the areas that you've got with sticking out detail, rivets and hinges and things, so you can see the cotton bud's getting quite torn up. The first thing the meths does is it brings out that underlying blue colour quite nicely, so you can see the colour you're aiming at. I'm just going to wash it on. If I leave that for a while on the surface, it will actually start to soften the finish, and you can see there that I'm starting to get colour coming off on the cotton bud. Now this is quite brutal, and you're going to go through a lot of cotton buds to get this done, and even with this you're never going to get all the weathering off. You can use other thinners if you like, but meths is the least harsh. If you use white spirit, unfortunately it tends to soften the whole paint finish, so you'll start taking the weathering off and then almost immediately you'll be through to the plastic. Same if you use a paint stripper, so if you use isopropyl alcohol or super strip, unless you're very, very careful, you'll go straight through both the weathering finish and the paint finish and end up on the plastic in one go, which leads to a painting session of a different sort. Now I know that this is starting to come apart, but hopefully what you can see if I bring that up is that I've actually taken the paint off of that white area now, so instead of it being this sort of slightly sandy colour, it's actually starting to show white, and that means that I'm having some success at getting this factory applied weathering finish off. The thing about the cotton buds is they're quite good for getting into the detail on the model, but they're never going to get all of this paint off. We're always going to have some of this left. So having removed the factory weathering, we're left with a slightly streaky, patchy finish, which we're going to have to weather again to disguise, and there's no way around it, unfortunately. If you insist on buying a factory weathered model for whatever reason, in my case because it was cheap, then you either put up with the rather strange shade of brown that the factory sprayed onto it, or you have to accept the fact that it's going to be very, very difficult to completely de-weather it. You can, if you strip it all the way back to plastic, just dismantle the model and dunk the whole thing in paint stripper, but then that kind of defeats the object of buying a ready-to-run vehicle in the first place. So I'm not going to do the whole wagon because that would be a very lengthy video, but you can see now, if I just take a clean cotton bud to this end, I've actually managed, while we've been chatting here, to successfully remove a fair amount of that finish. What I'm going to try and do is I'm just going to make that panel wet. The thing about meths is that as it dries, it will leave a light bloom on the surface of the model, and the only way you really get rid of that is by going over your stripped model with a little bit of white spirit. It's not going to do a lot of damage because it's going to attack the meths first of all. It's not going to take the paint finish off, but it will get rid of that bloom. And in fact, you can see on this brush I am definitely starting to remove blue paint almost straight away, whereas with this, that is mostly sand coloured. So yeah, taking off a factory finish, I'd recommend using meths, but having done it, you are still going to have to weather this to reinstate a surface finish of some sort, because even doing that, I've got a streaky finish and I'm not going to be able to get all of that off without a lot of work, which is what I'm going to dive in to do. What we'll do is I'll come back when I've cleaned the side off, and then we'll see what it looks like. Okay, welcome back. I've worked at the side with some meths, put it on, left it to soak in, and then went over it again with a meth soaked cotton bud. I've got a stack of used cotton buds here, and I've taken off most of that factory weathering from the body side. Unfortunately, I've also managed to take off some of the printing at this end of the wagon, which makes me wonder if it's been applied separately to the tear and XP code on the bottom. I suspect that Bachmann would do that so that this is a standard wagon and then they can just apply different numbers, different tops codes and so on, because this one's a PMV and the lettering is laid out almost identically, and I wonder if these are then applied at two separate times. So unfortunately, in removing the weathering, I've managed to take off some of the detail. Luckily, I've got sheets of transfers that will enable me to put those back in. Railtech, for example, will do 3-inch high numbers or 4-inch high numbers and letters that will enable me to reinstate that. And this tiny lettering is unreadable on this particular wagon, but you can get those on HMRS sheets and other sheets for PMVs. So I'm going to reinstate that from transfers before I finish this wagon off. What you can see though is I've got back to the base colour. Now again, you can possibly see that these planks here have been picked out in a lighter blue to suggest replacement planks, but actually they're the colour of this wagon. I'll put this wagon down, those planks are this colour. Now this is a pretty good rail blue colour. This is very, very dark, and I'm wondering if again Bachmann have actually applied this very dark colour to the wagon because they know that this factory applied weathering is going to lighten the tone somewhat, and they're trying to offset that by just printing a darker colour on the model in the first place. That's really weird. Unfortunately, that does mean that picking out details on the wagon and re-weathering it is going to have to try and not affect that base tone too much, because it is quite a dark blue. So again, I can go back in with a brown wash to bring out the planks, and that will also flood over the top of any of that factory weathering that's sitting inside the grooves in the planking. So that's the aim. So I'll go over that whole side with that brown wash. There's a little bit of paint sticking around some of the bottom of the doors and in some of the detail, and again that wash should conceal all of that, and what we'll end up with is a wagon that's not too dissimilar to that, except it'll be this slightly darker shade. What I can do is I'll probably go over some of this surface with a very light dry brush of rail blue, and that will lighten the planks up, and I'll come back when all that's done just to show you the effect on the finish. Got to be careful obviously to not go over these torn labels and the existing print, but I'll try and just lighten the whole tone of the side of the vehicle by introducing a lighter shade of blue. And I can do that with an acrylic, and I'll do that in one of the acrylic videos just to rescue it further, as I've got to repaint the underframe to get rid of that horrible colour. You'll notice also that the factory weathering has completely failed to get into the underframe itself, so it's just sitting on these W-irons and the bits of the brake gear and the parts hanging down, but none of it has settled inside the framing at all, which is again most unrealistic, to be honest. Anyway, onwards and upwards.